Like most other hobbies, woodworking can get expensive. You have power tools and hand tools and accessories and jigs and fixtures, not to mention materials and consumables, and you add all of that up and it can kind of be a lot. So, like any reasonable person, I try to keep costs down whenever I can. Finding bargains can be challenging, especially in something as sort of niche as woodworking, but it is possible, so that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. When I talk about saving money, I don't mean waiting for a sale or cutting coupons. Those are obvious and pretty much everyone knows that. But I am going to talk about some tips that hopefully will be helpful, not just for beginners, but also for seasoned veterans. There may be some people watching who are interested in getting into woodworking but haven't yet because they're just concerned about the upfront costs. I'm not going to stand here and say that I can eliminate all the costs or make it really cheap to get into woodworking because I can't. It's still going to have some cost. It's still going to be relatively expensive. But if you can keep costs down, then hopefully this will encourage you to get started. Speaking of getting started, I'm going to get started with the best way to save money, which is to get tools secondhand. Of course, I'm saying this in front of my very expensive saw stop, which I bought new. When you're buying tools, you have to know where not to skimp. A table saw is one of those places where you really don't want to be too cheap. But for pretty much all of the other power tools and hand tools as well, you can look on Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, OfferUp, estate sales, garage sales, and even auctions. Looking at my major power tools, okay, I bought this one new. My lathe I got new at Harbor Freight, along with the dust collector and the drill press I got new. But I got my drum sander, jointer, planer, and mortising machine used on Facebook Marketplace. And my bandsaw I got on Craigslist. And my oscillating spindle sander and shop vac I got at an auction. Along with those deals, I've also bought several major power tools at Harbor Freight. They have great prices to begin with, but when things go on clearance, the prices get really good. I know that not everybody who's watching is in the US. In Canada, they have Princess Auto and Canadian Tire, which are very similar to Harbor Freight. And if you're not in the US or Canada, I can't help you with Harbor Freight or Princess Auto, but you can still look for used secondhand tools. And for hand tools, like everything you see behind me, garage sales, estate sales, flea markets, swap meets, those are all great places to find tools that are used but still in very good condition, or that you can actually fix up and make like new. Or at least, if not like new, at least usable. And speaking of cheap tools, you won't see anything made by Woodpeckers or Festool in my shop. I'm not saying that those aren't good companies. I know they are great companies and they make great tools. They also make very expensive tools. I am not interested in expensive tools. I'm interested in keeping my costs down. So you'll see a lot of tools in here that I've gotten from Amazon, AliExpress, or Temu. And they work fine. Some of them even work great. Okay, now that I've convinced everybody to go out and buy a shop full of great used tools, the next thing that you're going to need are accessories and jigs. You can go online and buy all the jigs that you want. The problem is they are very, very expensive. The great part, though, is that you can make them all yourself. There are two big benefits to making your own jigs. Number one, obviously you're saving a ton of money. But number two, I get a lot of pride when I use jigs that I made myself that work perfectly the way that they're supposed to. Here's a list of just some of the jigs that I've built. Table saw crosscut sled, a fence for my router table, a wedgie sled for cutting segments for segmented bowls, a coping sled, a kerf making jig, a bowl press, another bowl press, a circle cutting jig for the bandsaw, a circle cutting jig for the router, a drill press table, two Longworth chucks, a donut chuck, a bench grinder table, a Wolverine jig, two different knife sharpening jigs, a depth gauge, and many, many more that I just can't think of right now and I don't want to bore you with. I made all of these jigs out of really cheap material, usually 2x4s and plywood. That's what I had available, and there's really no need to use any more expensive materials than that. I've seen some people on YouTube making jigs out of pretty expensive hardwoods or pretty expensive plywood even. I don't find that's necessary. If other folks want to do that, that's great. But my jigs are functional, and that's all they need to be. They don't need to look pretty, they just need to work. And as long as they work, I'm happy. And speaking of building things cheap, another thing that you can build in your workshop that will save you a ton of money are tool carts. If you look around my shop, you'll see only two power tools that have mobile bases, that are made by the manufacturer. That's my table saw and my bandsaw. The only reason I had those is because it happened to come with the tool. But then again, my drum sander, my jointer, my lathe, and my dust collector all came with mobile tool stands. I took them off of those and made my own. I use very simple designs, no fancy joinery, and very cheap materials to make my tool carts. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I apologize for the mess, but my flip-top tool cart is made of nothing but 2x material and a very small amount of 1/2-inch plywood. Much of it is just screwed together, but the base here did have to be very strong, so I ended up using finger joints. And over here, I used some half-laps. But the rest of it is just screwed together. My other tool carts, which don't have to bear nearly as much weight, are made of MDF and 2x material, which is just screwed together, and on the bottom I have some very cheap casters. This cart from my drill press has the exact same design. And so does my lathe. These tool carts were all built really cheaply, really for pennies. Most of the material I actually got for free. I'll talk about material in a couple minutes. If you're wondering about durability, I made the cart for my lathe about 10 years ago. It's been absolutely fine since then. Now, one thing that you will not see on any of my tool carts or on any of my jigs around the shop is a finish. And that's another money-saving tip. I don't put finish on anything in my shop. Like I said a minute ago, I just need everything in here to be functional. I don't really need it to look pretty. I honestly don't even want it to look pretty. I'm not taking anything away from anybody who wants to make their shop look nice. If you have a color scheme and you want to paint your jigs, go for it. That's just not what I choose to do. I do what works for me. You should do what works for you. But if you're looking to save money, you can save money on finish. One thing that you should not save money on, though, is wood glue. Don't buy cheap wood glue. Use the good stuff. I use almost exclusively Titebond glue here. I'm not sponsored by Titebond. I just really like how it works. But when you go to buy glue, buy the biggest bottle that you can. A 4-ounce bottle right now is about $1.29 per ounce. A gallon bottle is about 17 cents per ounce. So buy in bulk. You may be thinking it's going to take me 10 years to go through a gallon of wood glue. Well, that's actually fine because the shelf life of PVA glue is about 10 years. You can actually extend that even a little bit longer if you keep it in the refrigerator. Now you may be thinking, well, I'm not going to lug a gallon of glue around my shop. I don't expect you to. You could go and buy a glue bottle for about $6 or $8 online. There are more expensive versions also. Or you can go to AliExpress and buy a condiment bottle for about $1. Or you can use one of these. I know you have a bottle of mustard in the house. So when you're done with it, just wash it out thoroughly. You don't want your projects to smell like mustard. Don't ask me how I know. But once it's clean, put the glue in here and use this. FYI, this is not my tip. I got this from John Heiss. While I'm on the subject of glue, you may be tempted to go buy a glue spreader online. I had one that was made of silicone and I wasn't really impressed with how it worked. You have to wait for the glue to completely dry before you can break it off and then use it again. And you had bits of dried glue that was left on there and it could get on your project. It was a mess. So instead, I've just been using really whatever I can find around the shop. This is a plastic strap handle from some cardboard box that I threw out. I've also used bits of cardboard. Really anything that's flat will work. The best thing that I found, though, are hotel key cards. Well, I've talked about how to save money on power tools and hand tools and consumables and jigs, and now I'm going to talk about materials. My number one tip about saving money on lumber is don't buy it at the big box stores. Now, you know the places I'm talking about. They do sell lumber, and it's usually S4S, which means it's sanded on all four sides. It's convenient, but you're paying for that convenience. I found that lumber to be 4 to 5 times as expensive as you can buy it pretty much anywhere else. So you can save some money by buying it at a lumber yard and then planing it yourself. Of course, you'll need a planer for that. But in the long run, as long as you keep up with this hobby, it will save you money to plane it yourself. But I don't want to talk about how to save a little bit of money on material. I want to talk about how you get materials for really cheap or even free. My best source of free lumber has been dumpsters. Don't get grossed out. I don't mean dumpsters behind a grocery store, but look for dumpsters at construction sites. As they're framing the house, they will throw away literally tons of 2x material. You can also sometimes find sheets of MDF that they're throwing out. But the big score is when they're doing the flooring. Look for a house where they're installing hardwood floors. They throw out tons of scraps of hardwood floor. I would not suggest just showing up to the construction site and jumping in the dumpster and grabbing stuff. Just talk to the foreman and ask if it's okay if you go into the dumpster and fish out stuff that you want. Probably 100 times out of 100, they will kind of look at you funny but say, go take what you want. They know that anything that goes in the dumpster is just going to go to a landfill anyway. Another way that you can source free wood is by using your ears and listening for a chainsaw. Where I live, especially around the wintertime and after big storms, I hear crews all over the place taking down trees. And just like with construction sites, the arborists really don't care if you show up with your chainsaw and ask if you can have some of it. I've scored huge logs of sugar maple and cherry and holly and all kinds of wood just by listening for chainsaws and following my ear. And if you ask nice enough and maybe tip them a few bucks, they'll often cut it into pieces for you. And just like at a construction site, these guys know that all this wood is just going to go to waste. It's either going to go to a dump or it's going to be put in the shredder. So they're usually happy for you to take it. Another great source for really cheap wood is auctions. I just bought about 245 square feet of hardwood flooring at an auction for about $25. All I need to do is cut off the tongues and the grooves, plane off any finish and the grooves on the underside, and I'll end up with about 165 board feet of wood at about 15 cents per board foot. One final place where you can find cheap or even free wood are mill shops, cabinet shops, and furniture makers. They will usually have scraps and cutoffs that they're willing to part with for pennies or even for free sometimes. That's where I've gotten a lot of great scraps of maple and walnut and sapele for making bonsai stands and cutting boards. One great last resource for free wood is pallets. Now, you'll have to plan with pallets. Some of them will have junk, but I've gotten cherry and mahogany and hickory and oak and all kinds of different hardwoods from pallets. Keep in mind though, pallets are a lot of work. You have to take a lot of nails out. A lot of them are rusty. A lot of them are broken. You'll just kind of have to pick through and see if you can find any that are good. Then you'll have to take them apart and there'll be nail holes. So these won't work on big projects, but you can certainly use them for smaller projects. Well, that's about all that I could think of for big tips to save big money on big stuff. I have lots of other tips for saving smaller amounts of money on smaller things like buying a sandpaper eraser, but I'll save that for another video. Before I let you go, please don't forget to hit the like button. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already and you think I deserve it, and I hope to see you next time.